Welcome to Playback, Tier 2 World's weekly showcase of our best stories from around the globe. Coming up. Amid fears of a possible Russian invasion, Ukraine comes together for a day of unity. It's been 6 months since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan. We have a special report from inside the country on the changes that have happened and their impact on the people. And as the economic crisis deepens in Lebanon, authorities are now facing a new threat. In Ukraine, incidents of shelling across the area, dividing government forces and Russian-backed forces, increased on Thursday. President Volodymyr Zelensky called it a big provocation. Ukraine forces said the separatists opened fire on more than 10 settlements, using heavy artillery, mortars, and a tank. The Kremlin says it's deeply concerned by the escalation, but there's been no progress on a diplomatic solution to the crisis. Washington and Moscow disagree on the most important issues of the current standoff, including Ukraine's possible membership of NATO. Well, meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky declared February 16th a day of unity, calling on Ukrainians to come together to sing the national anthem and wave flags. Tier 2 World Sarah Firth was in the capital, Kiev, during the ceremonies and sent us this report.
A show of unity on a day that had been flagged as the potential date of another Russian invasion. Instead, the president urged Ukrainians to stand together. On the streets, there wasn't a huge turnout. The idea of a day of unity, when the threat from Russia looms so large, didn't sit well with some.
I'm Ukrainian and I want everything to be Ukrainian. I want Ukraine to be protected from Putin. How is it even possible that day in this century we are in a situation where Russia is threatening us?
Moscow's announcement that it's pulling back some troops from the border has been met with some skepticism.
There's a proverb, to promise to marry and to get married are two different things. And the aggressor country has already violated the agreements. That's why it would not be wise to believe the Russians have fully withdrawn.
The response from Ukraine's allies has bolstered the military. Troops who have been patrolling the front lines in a conflict that's dragged on for 8 years now. Here in Kiev, some civilians have been signing up to territorial defense units in preparation for a worst-case scenario.
I want to sign up for the territorial defense of Kiev to protect my relatives, my children and grandchildren. That's the way it is. I think victory will be ours. We are optimistic.
Optimism, though, is perhaps running in short supply after months of speculation on what Moscow's next move might be. Behind me, those lights in the window, just some of the journalists covering the latest on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. But there's a huge inconsistency right now between what all sides are saying, the actions they take, and what the world is hearing. What is very real is the impact this is having on Ukrainian people just trying to get on with their everyday lives. Sarah Firth, TRT World, Kiev.
But throughout the crisis, Moscow has insisted that fears about an invasion are overblown. In an exclusive interview with TRT World, the Russian ambassador to Turkey accused Western countries of creating panic despite the Kremlin's efforts to engage in diplomacy. Alexei Arkov says it appears some politicians are trying to provoke Russia.
There is literally a kind of hysteria around this issue, and I'm not exaggerating. Citizens are being evacuated, embassies are being closed and relocated. There's talk of an almost inevitable Russian invasion of Ukraine, and even its possible dates are being articulated. By the way, one such date was yesterday, the other is today, the third one will be tomorrow. And so what, has the invasion taken place? And at the same time, the most modern weapons, including strike weapons, are being pumped into Ukraine, and foreign instructors are sent to the Ukrainian army. The main thing is that the preconditions for provocative actions are being created, tensions are being pumped up. In general, one gets an impression that on the sly, someone would obviously not mind provoking us to some reckless actions in order to then use the so-called hellish sanctions against Russia.
Let's now look at some of the other stories that made headlines over the week. A delegation of senior Turkish officials paid a two-day visit to Palestine and Israel. Presidential spokesperson Ibrahim Kalın and Deputy Foreign Minister Sedat Önal led the delegation. The reapproachment between Turkey and Israel has been welcomed by both governments. The trip comes ahead of Israeli President Isaac Herzog's visit to Turkey, planned for earlier next month. And on Tuesday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan completed his first visit to the United Arab Emirates in almost a decade. The trip was aimed at strengthening relations between the countries. Erdogan used the occasion to deepen economic ties as he and the ruler of Dubai signaled an end to a years-long rift between the nations. The Turkish president also visited the country's Expo Pavilion. Erdogan says Turkey is set to lead a green revolution with its sustainability projects.
We are among the few countries in the world that increase forestation. In addition, Turkey ranks 5th in Europe and 12th in the world in terms of renewable energy installations. By ratifying the Paris Climate Agreement, we set the green development revolution as the first goal of our 2053 vision. I would also like to mention Turkey's first electric car, TOG, which is proof of the importance we attach to the environment. When it starts mass production at the beginning of next year, TOG, which is here on display in the exhibition area, will contribute to the protection of the environment. Turkey's participation in the expo under the subtopic Region of Sustainability is evidence of our strong stance in this area. Regardless of what happens, rather than pursuing growth, development or enrichment, we support processes that respect people, nature and the environment.
Well, this week also marks 6 months since the Afghan government collapsed and the Taliban took control of the country. The group, officially known as the Islamic Emirate, has not been recognized by a single foreign government. It's been shut off from international banking and funding, on which the previous administration relied on to pay public salaries and keep the economy afloat. Soraya Leni has sent this report from Kabul.
Sayyid Abdullah used to walk this path every day. But now he has few places to go, except back home. He lost his construction job after the collapse of the Afghan government.
Back then, I used to make about $7 or $8 a day. Now I don't get a cent. We're all out of work.
Abdullah shows us around his house.
This is the shower and also the kitchen. See, we have few dishes. This is our gas bottle, which is finished. And with this, we sometimes fetch water for tea. We have a little bit of chickpeas left and some dal, which we can add to rice.
Most of the day there's no power. There's only one small heater and an outside toilet.
It's not as though we built this place in 6 months or a year. It took us 7 years to build this, and it's still not finished.
Abdullah's case isn't isolated.
This is one of the poorest areas in Kabul. There are no shopping malls, fancy apartments or even restaurants. In short, there's no development. And residents say even though trillions of dollars were spent in Afghanistan over the past 20 years, none of it ended up here.
In this hilltop neighbourhood, people like Abdullah say they prefer their former meagre salaries to handouts and aid. But they may not have a choice. 75% of the previous government's budget came from foreign grants. And since August, donors such as the US have refused to bankroll a state led by the Taliban. At the busiest women's hospital in Afghanistan, most staff, including midwives, have only received 2 of the past 6 months' pay.
About 2 months' salary for our respected doctors was unpaid by the previous government. The Islamic Emirate paid that because those staff are the most necessary. They work around the clock, 24 hours a day. And then just a few days ago, the International Red Cross paid this month's salary.
And since the Taliban took power, they're under more pressure now than before.
Previously, a lot of people didn't want to go to a public hospital. They wanted to go private because they had the chance. They had money to pay for the services. But now more people are coming to public hospitals. The price of medication has also risen a lot, so some people can't afford to go elsewhere.
Access to proper healthcare is a matter of life and death, and Human Rights Watch estimates Afghanistan has the highest maternal mortality rate in Asia. Doctors say already too many women and babies are dying because of the country's poor healthcare system. And they're scared, knowing the worse things become, the fewer lives they can save. Soraya Leni, TRT World, Kabul.
Well, hardship and instability have also defined life in Lebanon. As the country grapples with a financial meltdown, it's seen a surge in kidnapping cases. Families are terrified, and experts say not much can be done to prevent it. Priyanka Navani reports from Beirut.
11-year-old Rayan Kanan and his family are recuperating after the most horrifying event of their lives.
That day was a very bad day. My family and I were in the store buying clothes, and then I found myself flying, and I'm gone. We went to the forest and slept there the whole night, and I didn't think I'll go home. After I prayed, I felt like I'll go home, and thank God, now I'm back.
Rayan was snatched almost 2 weeks ago while out shopping with his mother. Kidnappers demanded $250,000 for his safe return, but police officers found him within 24 hours.
Everything changed after that. Now I count to 10 before going anywhere. I always think that maybe it will happen again.
Perhaps the most heartbreaking element to Rayan's story is the fact that it is not an isolated incident. In the last 4 weeks, 12 people have gone missing in Lebanon, which experts largely believe is due to cases of forced marriage and, as in Rayan's case, extortion. These are numbers that haven't been seen since the country's civil war and are a worrying indicator of just how bad the current crisis has become. The reason for the rise in cases and the reason that few families can afford such a ransom are one and the same. Since 2019, Lebanon has been hit hard by an economic crisis that has sent the local currency into freefall and millions into poverty. Fatima Al-Hajj, a lawyer at Keffe, an NGO that fights against violence and exploitation, says the problem is a combination of gangs, an absentee government, and a broken justice system.
There is no serious will to fix this matter. If we don't take steps to stop this soon, we will see it increase more and more, and people may be terrified to go out at night or in the day.
For families like the Kanans, that day has already come.
I wanted to say every parent in Lebanon, take care of your kids. Ryan was with me, and this happened. It could happen to anyone.
They say they're appealing to anyone that will listen for a chance to get out of Lebanon. Priyanka Navani, TRT World, Beirut.
Well, let's now take a look at some of the coronavirus stories that made headlines during the week. In Hong Kong, daily infections have surged about 20 times higher over the past 2 weeks. Health officials reported more than 6,000 cases on Thursday. Hospitals are overwhelmed by the rapid increase, and patients are being treated outdoors. The city's chief executive, Carrie Lam, says her government remains committed to its zero COVID policy, but there are no plans for a citywide lockdown. Meanwhile, Austria is expected to lift most of its remaining COVID-19 restrictions by the first week of March. The government says the decision was made as daily infections continue to drop. Restaurants and nightclubs will be allowed to be reopened, although face masks will still be mandatory in essential shops and on public transport. The rule on compulsory vaccinations remains in place. And a similar situation in the Netherlands. Starting on Friday, the Dutch government is lifting most of its coronavirus measures. Bars and restaurants will be allowed to stay open past midnight, and social distancing measures will be scrapped. But visitors will be required to show proof of either a vaccination, a negative test result, or a recent recovery from COVID-19. Well, the coronavirus pandemic has disrupted almost everything, including the global supply of coffee. While Uganda's beans have been in constant demand, farmers in the East African country are using bees to make their yields larger and tastier. Darren Allen Kiyuni reports.
Wilson Sovia is a prominent coffee farmer in central Uganda. For the past 4 years, he's been able to grind out a successful business from his 10 acres of land. He says his secret to success is his neighbors.
It is difficult on our farms because of high costs of production and changing weather patterns. But after my neighbors brought bees nearby, they helped me a lot. They pollinate my coffee flowers, which has helped me double my yield. We used to get about 1,200 kilograms of beans, but now it's up to about 3,000 kilograms.
William Mwebe has raised more than 170,000 bees in 40 hives next to Wilson's coffee plantation.
In the morning, the bees go and collect nectar, and they fetch honey at noon when the flowers are bright. One bee can yield a big spoonful of honey before it dies. It can make more than 7 visits to flowers in a single day.
Any other insect may pollinate these flowers, but agriculture officials say if it is done by a bee aged at least 28 days, the resultant coffee bean usually has a better aroma. Coffee trees like this flower often, and the presence of bees guarantees quick pollination so the fruit can develop. If not pollinated early, the flowers dry out and die without bearing fruit. That means a loss to the farmer. Uganda is Africa's largest coffee exporter. According to its Coffee Development Authority, the country shipped a record 6 million bags abroad in 2020, worth $560 million. Demand for Ugandan coffee is on the rise from countries such as Turkey.
First of all, is a great test. And second one is tax rules is changed our countries, our governments, no more tax for coffees. And another one, the other countries, depends of COVID-19 and others, challenge in all on the world.
Uganda's government is aiming to export 20 million bags of coffee by 2030. And as more buzz builds around their beans, farmers like Wilson hope these busy bees will continue to raise their stock. Darren Alancheune, TRT World, Luwero, Central Uganda.
Still to come on Playback, a state of emergency is declared in a city north of Rio de Janeiro after deadly landslides and flash flooding. And we'll show you how a Kenyan company is finding new ways to protect the planet using pencils. Well, more than 100 people have been killed in landslides and flash flooding in the Brazilian city of Petropolis. Located in the mountains north of Rio, the city was hit by heavy downpours equivalent to 1 month of rain in a single day. Craig Vermey reports.
Many people have been killed and hundreds more have been left homeless after mudslides and floods hit a mountainous region of Brazil's Rio de Janeiro state. They were triggered by torrential rains on Tuesday. Houses in hillside neighbourhoods of Petropolis were destroyed and cars swept away as floodwaters washed through the streets.
When this fell, I pulled my mother out, and only one girl in the bar managed to get out. We went up that street and got into a neighbor's house, where I saw all the houses falling, like an avalanche. Everything fell at once. Something absurd. I never thought I'd see this in my life.
It's desperate, a feeling of loss so big. You have no idea what it's like going through this. Very sad, very, very sad. Our city is gone, our neighborhood is gone.
Churches have opened their doors to help those who have lost homes and loved ones.
At this moment, our main work is to welcome people. Many houses have been destroyed, many families have seen their relatives killed, and what we are doing here is to welcome, mainly by giving food, dignity, kind words, so that these people can feel a little more comfortable in the midst of a great tragedy.
Many people have lost absolutely everything. They have nothing, and you have to simply welcome them, provide a place for them to stay, a simple hug in such an important moment.
The city's mayor has declared a state of emergency, and President Jair Bolsonaro has promised immediate assistance for the victims. More than 180 soldiers have been deployed to the area to help with the search and rescue operations. Craig Vermey, TRT World.
The demilitarized zone separating North and South Korea has been the scene of tense political standoffs over the years. But it's also turning into an up-and-coming hotspot for birdwatching, with hundreds of protected species in the area. Officials from the local county have even introduced small tours that are bringing people together. Frank Smith reports.
These white-naped cranes are one of the world's most vulnerable bird species, and many of them spend their winter in the demilitarized zone near Chardwan County. Retired photojournalist E.E. Gyu sees great potential to develop wilderness tourism in a place he has been birdwatching, especially of cranes, for decades.
This area has such qualities of nature beauty that can attract not only Korean, but also foreign tourists. If the habitat is further developed into a tourist site, I believe it will receive global attention.
Limited tours are now being offered in the civilian control zone, but local activists recognize the need to keep visitor numbers down.
Unconditional development of the Chardwan area is human greed. The answer is balance, preserving nature, and allowing a habitat for the cranes to visit and rest.
Seeding the Hantan riverbed helps fuel the cranes' migration. Many locals hope the region can one day open up further to tourists and believe that North Korea's harvest shortfalls are driving more birds south of the DMZ no man's land. Turning the DMZ into a wildlife tourism reserve will mean overcoming more than just political challenges. In addition to the visible infrastructure, the fencing and barriers, the border regions are littered with approximately 2 million landmines, which would take years to clear. The so-called peace crane represents that desire for political change.
Day and night, the people of Chardwan endure living 2 kilometers or even 1 kilometer from the border fences. I hope unification to occur soon, so that northern areas of the DMZ can also become accessible to both cranes and people.
In early spring, the white-naped cranes fly back over North Korea to summer breeding grounds in Mongolia and Russia. Frank Smith, TRT World, Chardwan, South Korea.
Nearly 15 billion pencils are manufactured every year. That's roughly the equivalent of 300,000 trees. Now, a Kenyan company has given this costly instrument an eco-friendly makeover. And Masharia has more.
As the world grapples with the impact of waste and how to increase recycling, a Kenyan company, Momo Pencils, has found a way of turning old newspapers into beautiful pencils. The company buys the waste newsprint and uses 18 different processes to produce a water-resistant pencil that lasts up to 3 times longer than ordinary pencils. Mohamud Omari, the co-founder of the company, attributes the idea of Momo Pencils to the great emphasis on producing eco-friendly products which do not harm habitats, whether in production, use, or disposal.
We felt that apart from the generic usage of the pencil, which is writing and drawing, then we can also use the same tool to impact and make real change in the environment.
The pencils are sold through a number of retailers to businesses and government agencies, but also distributed free of charge to a number of schools.
When a child comes and asks for 10 shillings or 15 shillings to buy a pencil, it's a very big challenge for that parent. But when you empower that child through a pencil, what you've done is you've actually given them hope for education, hope for their future.
And Momo Pencil do not just supply them to schools, they also educate children about how they are made and why they are environmental friendly. Meba Lokango, Creative Mind School head teacher, applauds Momo Pencil for their efforts to empower children using recycled pencils.
Our children are so happy they are using the pencils in class. The pencils are good because they are not used to, they're not manufactured using wood. And we really appreciate Momo for having that idea.
The company makes around 100,000 pencils a day, and Mohamud is optimistic that his eco-friendly products will change the world one pencil at a time. As part of the world makes the transition towards recycling and renewable energy, initiatives such as Momo Pencils is doing their part to protect the environment by switching into eco-friendly practices and products. And Masharia TRT World, Nairobi.
Well, that rounds up your week of news here on Playback. Stay tuned to TRT World for the latest stories. But before we leave, we'll revisit what's often referred to as the greatest show in American sports, the Super Bowl. And this year's halftime show featured an especially powerful moment. Rapper Eminem ended his performance by dropping to one knee. Many believe the gesture was a nod to Colin Kaepernick, a black quarterback who began kneeling during the national anthem in 2016 to protest racial inequality and police brutality. Since then, the act has been associated with the Black Lives Matter movement and others calling for social justice.